האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Chayei Sarah, and in the Sefer it's Daf Reish Lamed Gimel. This is Os Hey, section number 5. We're going to take a look at one pasuk from the beginning of the Parshas Chayei Sarah, and then we're going to jump right into the Zera Shimshon himself. So this is Parak Chaf Gimel Pasuk Yud Aleph, and the pasuk says as follows. It is a pasuk taken from the discussion that Avram Avinu is having with the Bnei Ches, the people of Ches. He's trying to find a burial spot. He has a very specific location in mind, and he asks to be directed to the person who owns that field and cave, and that man's name is Ephron Hachiti. So here's a pasuk quoting Ephron's response to Avram's request to buy his land. Lo Adoni Shema'eni. No, my master, hear me. Hasadeh nasati loch. The field, I have given it to you. Ve'hame'ara asher bo lecho nisatiha. And the cave that is in it, meaning the cave that is in this field, to you, I have given it. Le'enei v'nei ami, in front of the eyes of my people. Nisati haloch, I have given it to you. Kavor mesecha, bury your dead. So in that pasuk, Ephron is trying, apparently, seemingly, to convince Avraham that there's no reason for him to pay for the land, to buy the land, but rather Ephron, a generous a man that he is and kind man that he is insisting upon giving the land as a gift to Avraham so that Avraham can use it in his time of need, in his time of distress, to bury Sarah Imenu, to bury Sarah, his wife. So that pasuk is going to loom large in the Zera Shimshon's discussion, which completely revolves around the sale of the land and many strange things that the Zera Shimshon notices that relate to the sale or gift of the land of Maras HaMachpelah, of the cave of Machpelah. So let's go right in. Os Hey, section 5. Pasuk, the pasuk says, and this is the pasuk we just read, Hasadeh nasati loch, the field I have given to you, ve'hama'ara asher bo, and the cave that is in it, etc. Hikshu hameforshim, the commentators ask, Eich Ephron chazar bo midiburo. How did Ephron retract what he said? He clearly said to Avram in this pasuk, I'm insisting that you don't have to pay me. I'm insisting that you don't have to purchase this land. I'm giving it to you in front of everyone. I am hereby giving you the land. How did Ephron get out of that? Shemitchila hera atzmo nediv leiv la'Avraham, because from the beginning he had showed himself to be a very generous person to Avraham, litno lo b'matana, to give him this piece of land that he owned as a gift. But later on, just a few psukim later, we see that he had a very specific and very high price in mind to sell the land to Avraham. So the question is, how did Ephron, and why did Ephron move from this generous offer of giving the land as a gift and then very quickly somehow turn it into a sale at a high price? V'tirtzu, and the commentators answer, Shemasha Omer Mitchilo Litlim B'matana, the fact that Ephron in the beginning said very publicly that he would give the land as a gift, Lo Omar Ela Keneged B'nei Ches. He was only saying that because it was in public and he wanted the townspeople and the members of his group, his tribe, to hear him say that. In order that they would not come the next day, and they would claim possession of this land from Avraham, mishum dina de bar matzra, because of the law of bar matzra. It's very important for us to pause here for a moment to discuss the dina de bar matzra. This is a law that says, a din that says, that if a person wants to sell his land to someone else, he's obligated to give first right of refusal to his neighbors. So if I have a piece of land, I can't just go sell it. I shouldn't just go sell it to a stranger who lives somewhere else. I should go to my neighbors and say to them, I'm interested in selling my land. Here's the price that I have in mind. If you would like to buy it, I'll be happy to sell it to you. If they are not interested or they don't want to pay my price, then I can sell it to someone else who doesn't live, who's not a neighbor and doesn't have any fields adjoining my property. But if there are people who do have fields that connect to my property, then they have to have the first right to buy it. And of course, this is easily understood that this makes for good neighbors and leads to peaceful relations and harmonious relations with one's neighbors, who would prefer, of course, under normal circumstances, to expand their property rather than to have a total stranger come in and buy a piece of property in the middle of their lands. So that's the Dina de Bar Matra. So the Zera Shimshon says that the commentators who asked the question, why did Ephron talk about a gift and then switch to a sale? They answer because when he talked about a gift, he was doing it so that the townspeople would think, oh, Ephron is giving this land to Avram as a gift, no problem. If they knew that he was selling it to Avraham, then they would say, Ephron, what are you doing? You should talk to us first. Talk to your neighbors. Offer to sell the land to us before you give it to this stranger. After all, even though they treated Avram with respect, he owned no land in the area, and he would have been considered a newcomer, a stranger. Umishum hachi, and because of this, le'enei b'nei ami nisati halach b'matana. That's why the pasuk specifically says, that's why Ephron is quoted as saying, in front of these people, I'm giving it to you as a gift. It's almost as if Ephron is winking at Avram and saying, in front of them, let's fool them. Let's together trick these people and make them think I'm giving it to you as a gift. Because if they know what's really happening, that I'm selling it to you, they're going to claim that I'm not allowed to do that and that they should have first dibs on the land. They should be able to get the land before you, Abraham, are able to acquire it. Dibimatana leispa dina de bar matra. Because the rule is, the halacha is, as you see from the quote here from the Gemara in Bava Metzia, that when you give a gift to someone, the rule of bar matra doesn't apply. You do not have to offer land to your neighbors first if you're planning to give the land as a gift to someone else. The halacha says that if you want to give your land as a gift, there are no restrictions. You can gift it to anyone, even a total stranger, even someone who doesn't live in the area at all. But if you want to sell it, that's where Dina de Bar Matra applies. And that's, according to that law and that protocol, Ephron would have been required to consult with his neighbors and allow them to purchase the land before selling it to Abraham. Umnam, beini uveinecha. So when Ephron turned to Avram and said, between you and I, let's step over here away from everyone, between you and I, Eretz Arba Meos Shekel Kesef, I will be happy to sell you the land for 400 silver shekalim. So there are two different stages, you might say, happening here according to these Meforshim that the Zera Shimshon is quoting. And the two stages are, stage number one, where Ephron in front of everyone says to Avram, here is the land, I want to give it to you. I insist upon giving it to you as a gift, as a matana, and that's the pasuk that we read. That's stage one. But then once Ephron says, come over here, my friend, let's talk over here, away from all of the maddening crowd, come over this way. Then Ephron says the price is 400 silver shkolim, a very high price, but that's when he's talking about a sale, not a gift, because the gift, according to this approach, this school of thought, was only kind of a sleight of hand. It was a trick to get everyone to back off and not worry about Dina de Bar Matra. And then once he sold it to Abraham, secretly no one else would know, and they would leave Abraham alone and the sale would go through. So according to this approach, Ephron had Abraham's ultimate benefit in mind. He did not want people to harass Abraham after the sale and tell Abraham that they should be able to get the land as opposed to Abraham having bought the land. So he made it seem like a gift publicly. He took that stance that it was a gift. And according to this approach, that would have helped Abraham be able to keep the land. And the sale part would have been their little secret, a little secret just between Ephron, the seller, and Avram Avinu, the buyer. Okay. So the Zer Shimshon is going to let us know that he is not fully satisfied with this answer. V'zeh hatirutz lo yitachen. This answer is not fully accurate or doesn't completely fit. She'im kain, because if that's really what was going on, hayolo la'avraham litein hakesef b'tzina. Avraham should have given the money to Ephron in private. Ve'adarabba, but just the opposite. Matzino, we find in the psukim, shen nosan lo hakesef le'ene kulam, that Avraham gave the money to Ephron in front of everyone. Kidichsiv, as the pasuk says, vayishkol Avraham le'Ephron es hakesef. Avraham weighed out the money, the coins to Ephron, the silver coins, asher diber ba'oznei v'nei ches, that had been spoken about in front of or in the ears of b'nei ches, within the hearing of b'nei ches. The mashma that this teaches us, or this implies, shekfar yadu me'akesef. The b'nei ches, the townspeople, Ephron's fellow townspeople, clearly knew about the money from this pasuk, and they knew that it was a sale. So the Zer Shimshon says, these Meforshim definitely have the right, they're asking the right question, and they're saying an answer that we'll see in a moment the Zer Shimshon thinks does certain things for us, but it can't be the whole story. It might be part of the story, but it can't be the whole story, because according to that story, Avraham and Ephron should have kept the sale, the aspect of sale, and certainly the transfer of funds, of money, completely bitzina, completely private and completely hidden from everyone else. But that's not what happened. Avraham paid the money in front of everyone, and everyone knew that Avraham was buying the land. So the Zer Shimshon says, you see that approach that he just brought down doesn't totally answer the question. It's not fully accurate, but we'll see in a moment that he does like a certain aspect of it. And even though this answer from the commentators that we mentioned above, no sein tam l'shvach, it does leave a nice taste. It does give us a certain benefit. She'im Avraham hayarotze likach sidei Ephron, because if Avraham wanted to buy the field of Ephron, and he only wanted to deal with Ephron, hayololelech le-Ephron. You can see there's a little typo there. It says me Ephron with a mem. It should be, the mem should be changed to a lamed. Hayololelech le-Ephron. Then he should have gone directly to Ephron. So why did he in fact go to all of the townspeople? Why did he come to an assembly of the town people and say to them, I'm here and I want to bury my dead? And then they responded, yes, we want to help you, and we're all willing to help you and give you our land. Fine, thank you. Can you please direct me to Ephron, to Ephron, to Ephron? Why didn't he just find out quietly, ask someone, where's Ephron? Where's this gentleman Ephron who owns this field? Boom, go to him and transact the deal. No, Avram came and must have had some reason to talk to the group of townspeople first. Ella, but kedei likach rishusam v'data mitachila. It must be that Avram wanted to get permission from everyone and do this transaction with their knowledge mitachila from the very beginning. That was Avram's intention, not to do a private transaction, but to make sure that everyone knew about it. Kedei shelo yuchlu l'macher liton al hasadeh, in order that the next day after the sale, they would not be able to make a claim dina de bar matzra, of the law of bar matzra, in which they would be able to tell Avram, okay, you think you just bought the land, but you missed something, sir. You missed the fact that you're a stranger, and we, the neighbors of Ephron, whose fields adjoin his field, have first right of refusal, and we want to buy the land, and therefore we can move you out and step in and purchase the land. Avram didn't want that to happen, just like the Meforshim said was the concern of Ephron. This Dina de Bar Matzra was Ephron's concern. So the Zer Shimshon is saying that also must have been Avram's concern. That must have played a part in the story, because that's the only way to explain why Avraham went to the townspeople first and made this such a public transaction. It must be because he wanted to deal with any claims that they might have made about having adjoining land to this land. Once they gave permission and they said, here's Ephron, you can make a deal with him, and they didn't bring up any issue of bar matzra of adjoining lands, then Abraham knew that he was okay to proceed. Mikol Makom, nevertheless, Adayin Kusha Rishona b'Makoma Omedes. Nonetheless, the original question still remains. The original question as to why Ephron talked and emphasized giving the land to Abram as a gift, and then very quickly turned it into a sale, that question we have not yet answered. In other words, the Meforshim who asked that question, again, had a very fundamental and important question that they were posing. Their answer helped us understand the story, but it doesn't answer the question because of how the Zera Shimshon explained. Abraham, if what they said was correct, then Abraham never would have publicly given over the money to Ephron. So there has to be more. She'im kfar nasnu, top of the second column. She'im kfar nasnu lo rishus liknos, because if the townspeople had already given Abraham permission to purchase the field, ein od sorech she'Ephron yomar litnu lo b'matana, then there would have been no need for Ephron to say, I'm going to give it to you, Abraham, as a gift. So the Zera Shimshon wants us to understand that that original question about Ephron talking about a gift and switching to a sale has not been answered, even though he does feel that the issue of Dina de Bar Matzor, of adjoining land, plays a role in understanding the psukim correctly. But our first question still stands. Why did Ephron change from gift to sale? The ode, and here's another question. The Zera Shimshon is going to pose three more questions. They'll give us a total of 4 questions to address. The ode, and another question, Mahu vayokum sidei Ephron. What does the pasuk mean? This is a pasuk a little later in the text, after the pasuk that we read. What does it mean when it says the field of Ephron rose up? What does that mean? The field of Ephron rose up. Va'afal pisha Rashi pirish, and even though Rashi already explained this term, Tekuma hayasolo, and Rashi said the land rose up means the land had a promotion. Its status rose up. Why? Because until Avram came on the scene, the land belonged to Ephron. Ephron was just a regular one of the townspeople. There was nothing particularly special about Ephron. However, Avraham was a unique spiritual personage. Avraham was like a melech, nasiya. They referred to Avram, nasiya Elokim atah b'sofenu. You are a prince of God. You are an honored spiritual leader. They understood this aspect of Avraham's personality, that he was far from being a regular, or just a regular, another person, a regular person. And so when the land went from Ephron's possession into Avram's possession, that's why Rashi says the pasuk refers to it as Vayokam. It rose up. It rose up in its stature. It rose up in its holiness. That's what Rashi says. Im kol zeh, even with all of this, Hadover tzorech bir yoser. This matter of those words, this wording of the land rose up requires more explanation. The Zera Shimshon saying, of course, Rashi's 100% correct, but the Zera Shimshon says, I think there's more to it. So that's question 2. What do the words mean? What more do the words mean and indicate Vayokam Sidei Ephron, and the field of Ephron rose up? The ode, another question, this is question 3. Shemipshat HaKosov, from the simple reading of the pasuk Besof Parshazu, at the end of Parshas Chayei Sarah, Nira she'Avram kona es hasada me'es b'nei Ches. It would appear that Avram actually bought the field from b'nei Ches, from the townspeople. V'lo ka'amar me'Ephron. And the pasuk at the end of Parshas Chayei Sarah doesn't say he bought it from Ephron. Dichsiv, as the pasuk says, Hasada asher kona Avraham me'es b'nei Ches, the field that Avraham bought from the b'nei Ches, Shama kubar Avraham v'Sara ishto, there Avraham and his wife Sarah were buried. Once, by the time we get to the end of Parshas Chayei Sarah, the Torah describes and narrates the death of Avraham. Here in the beginning of the Parsha, we're dealing only with the death of Sarah and Avram's efforts to bury her. By the end of the Parsha, Avram, the Torah tells us of Avraham's death, and it talks and it tells us that in the field that Avraham purchased from the B'nei Ches, not from Ephron, from the B'nei Ches, that's where he and Sarah were buried. So that's what it says there. Umei hakosav b'parshas Vayechi, And if you look at the last parsha in Sefer Bereshis, Parshas Vayechi, Nireh she'Avraham koneh hasada me'Ephron. You'll see that over there, when Yaakov Avinu is blessing his children, and he's making them take an oath to bury him in Eretz Canaan, back in Eretz Canaan, it says, it refers to Avraham buying the land from Ephron. Dichsiv, as the pasuk says, Asher kona Avraham es hasadeh. Avraham bought the field, v'chulei, etc. Me'es Ephron hachiti, from Ephron the Chiti. So the Zera Shimshon says the question is very clear. We have the story here of the transaction where Avram's dealing with both the Bnei Ches and both Ephron, but it certainly seems from the story here in the beginning of Parshas Chayei Sarah that he's buying the land from Ephron, ultimately from Ephron. But if you look at the end of Parshas Chayei Sarah, it clearly says Avraham was buried in the cave in the land that he bought from Bnei Ches, and it doesn't mention Ephron. Then, to make it even a little more confusing, you go to the story of Yaakov Avinu's blessing his children and his giving them an oath, making them swear that they would ultimately bring his body from Egypt back to be buried in Eretz Canaan in the same cave, in Maras HaMachpelah. And what is Maras HaMachpelah? What is its location? It's in the field that Avraham bought from Ephron. So the Torah seems to be going back and forth a little bit in terms of who was the actual seller from whom Avraham bought the field in the cave. And that is a problem for us. That was question 3. Here's the fourth and final question. V'lama lo kosav hachakra, and why over here did the Torah not just write a clear, simple pasuk? And the Zera Shimshon suggests this is what the Torah should write. Vayiken Avram es hasadeh, and Avraham purchased the field, me'es Ephron, from Ephron, bekesef, with the money, arba meo shekel, of 400 silver coins. Why not state it clearly and simply so there's no doubt about the transaction? K'moshe kosav b'David, which would be similar to, which would be modeled along the lines of a pasuk that we find in Shmuel Beis, the end of Shmuel Beis, when David purchases the threshing ground that would become the ultimate site of the Beis Hamikdash. And let's take a look at that pasuk. Vayiken David es hagoren, and David purchased the threshing floor, v'chulei, etc., bekesef shkolim chamishim, with 50 silver shkolim. So the Zera Shimshon says we don't need to look far. We don't need to make up a good, concise, clear language that the Torah could have used over here. We can actually go to a pasuk in Tanakh at the end of Shmuel Beis, which describes David HaMelech going to a non-Jewish person and saying, I want to buy your goren, I want to buy your threshing floor. Interestingly enough, in that story also, the owner of the goren says to David, please allow me to give it to you as a gift. You don't need to buy it. You're the king. You don't need to buy it. Let me give it to you. And David insists upon paying for it. And the pasuk clearly says, David HaMelech acquired the land by paying 50 silver shkolim. So the Zera Shimshon says, if the Torah had used that same format over here, then there would be no question. We wouldn't have to wonder, did he buy it from the Bnei Ches? Did he buy it from Ephron? What did he do? What exactly happened? There'd be no vagueness. There'd be no questions. Everything would be clear. But the Torah chose not to do that. Ela kosav, but rather the Torah wrote, Vayishkol Avraham le'Ephron, that Avraham weighed out, counted out the money to Ephron, Shenira, which makes it appear, Shelo b'derech keniya nosnam lo, that it wasn't in the normal way of purchase, of acquiring something, of buying something, when Avraham gave him the money. If Avraham gave him the money, it should have just said he bought the land from him with this money. As the Zera Shimshon said, that's the simplest, clearest way to say it. But it doesn't say that. It says, Vayishkol Avram le'Ephron, he measured out, or he counted out, he weighed the money to Ephron, which makes it seem something else besides a normal sale, a normal transaction. Something else is going on here. So if we pause here, the Zera Shimshon has now posed his 4 questions, and the common denominator of all of them, the Tzad HaShaveh Shebohen, is that clearly something about this transaction was unusual. We see that the first point was, Zer Shimshon's first point, we see that Ephron talked about a gift and then switched over to a sale. The second point was it uses a language of Vayakam, that once this transaction was over, the field rose up into Avraham's possession, which is an unusual thing to say, an unusual phrasing for the Torah to use. And thirdly, it's unclear because of different psukim seem to indicate Avram bought the land from Ephron. Other psukim indicated he bought it from the Bnei Ches. And lastly, we actually have a very clear pasuk by David HaMelech, which is used to describe his purchase of the land where the future Beis HaMikdash would be built on Har HaMoriah. Why not use that same clear, concise pasuk here, that same clear, concise language here? We don't know, but all of these show us that there's more than meets the eye with the purchase, with Avraham's purchase of the Maras HaMachpelah and the field that it was in. So let's move now to the Zer Shimshon's approach to answering these four questions. V'yuvan, and this all can be understood, b'mai de garsinan b'perek gimel de kiddushin, with something that we learn in the third parak of Maseches Kiddushin. The Gemara over there in the third parak, Maseches Kiddushin, tells a really interesting, wonderful story. The Gemara says, Rav Gidel have mehapech behahi ara. Rav Gidel was trying to purchase. He was kind of negotiating over a specific plot of land. Ozal Rebbe Abba Zavna. Rebbe Abba went and purchased the land. So we have Rav Gidel negotiating and discussing with the owners, making arrangements and negotiating to buy a piece of land. Rebbe Abba comes in and buys the land. Also Rav Gidel kable the Rebbe Zera. So Rav Gidel went and he complained about this. He told this story to Rebbe Zera. He said to Rebbe Zera, I don't know what to do. I was in the middle of negotiating about a piece of land. Along comes Rebbe Abba, very respected, great, one of the Amoraim, a great Talmid Chacham, a great Torah leader. But he buys the land without apparently without being concerned about the fact that I'm already involved in negotiations. So the Gemara, the Zer Shimshon leaves out the next step, which is where Rebbe Zera goes to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha and tells him about the story. And Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says, once the Shalosh Regalim, the next regel comes, the next holiday comes, and Rabbi Abba comes up to Yerushalayim, we'll talk to him, we'll find out how he can justify doing what he did. We'll deal with this at that point when the next regel comes, and we'll all be together in Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Abba did come up. Amar Le, and Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha said to him, my taima avid mar hachi. What is the reason that the master, meaning Rabbi Abba, did this? Why did you buy a land that Rav Gidel was already trying to purchase and was negotiating about? Amar Le lo yadana. Rabbi Abba had a simple answer. He said, I didn't know. I had no idea. I saw that they were selling a piece of land. I walked up. The owners didn't mention that someone else was trying to get it. They just said, you want to buy it? I said, yes. I gave them the money and I bought the land. I wasn't aware of Rav Gidel's negotiations. Hashta nami nisfa nehele mar. So Rav Yitzchak Nafcha said, okay, that's understandable. That's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. But at this point, you should arrange for the land to be transferred over to Rav Gidel. Give it to him. He was negotiating first. It was inappropriate. You did it unconsciously. You did it unaware. But nonetheless, now you should arrange to transfer the land, to sell the land to Rav Gidel, who was the first person negotiating for it. Amar Le, so Rabbi Abba said, Zevune lo mizav nolod. I am not going to sell this land, because it was my first land purchase. This was personally for me, this was my first purchase of land. Lo misamna milsa. And it's not a good siman, it's not a good sign, it's not a good omen to sell the first land that a person buys. When a person buys for the first time a piece of land, they shouldn't turn around and sell that land. That's a special bracha, a special gift that Hashem enabled them to buy that land, and it's not considered a good thing to just turn around and sell it. So Rabbi Abba says, I'm not going to sell. However, if Rav Gidel wants this land as a gift, nishkala, he can take it. He's welcome to take the land as a gift from me. I realized what I did. I should have checked more. It wasn't right. He was involved in negotiating. So Rav Gidel should take the land as a gift. The story continues in the Gemara. Rav Gidel lo nachis lo. Rav Gidel never went down to take possession of the land. Dichsiv, because the pasuk in Mishlei teaches us, V'sone matanos yichya. A person who hates gifts will live. And that pasuk was used by many of the members of Chazal, many of the people, the Tanoim, the Amoraim, to say, and actually the Gemara talks about earlier great people in Jewish history who followed this literally, and they refused to take gifts. They refused to be the recipient of a gift because of Sonei Matanos Yechya. People who hate gifts will live, and their life will be richer or fuller or longer. This pasuk isn't clear on what that means. But nonetheless, Rav Gidel said, I don't accept gifts, and I'm not going to accept this land as a gift, so I don't want anything to do with it. Lo mar nochis lo, v'lo mar nochis lo. So in the end, neither one of these great Torah masters went down to take possession of the land. Rav Gidel wouldn't take it because he wouldn't accept the gift, and Rabbi Abba wouldn't use it because he says, I'm giving the land as a gift to Rav Gidel. I certainly won't keep it for myself now that I know that he wanted it and was negotiating for it. Umekarya ara de Rabbanan. And this land ultimately was called a land of the rabbis. And the Meforshim explained, what does that mean, Arya de Rabbanan? It means that Rabbi Abba said that since neither of us are going to use it, Rav Gidel won't use it, and I won't use it, I want to give it over to the yeshiva students, to the Rabbanim and the yeshiva students, so that they could use this land for their own benefit. People could come and do whatever they wanted with the land. I imagine that means they could plant crops on the land, they could come just relax on the land, and they could use the land however they wished, because neither of the two original people involved in trying to be involved in the purchase of the land wanted to actually use it. Adkan, until here is a quote from the Gemara in Kiddushin. So the Zera Shimshon, and you can already see the wheels turning, the Zera Shimshon is going to use this story in Maseches Kiddushin to help us understand what was going on, the dynamics behind the scenes in the story of Avraham and Ephron and the Bnei Ches. Let's continue on the bottom of the second column. V'hachi nami, and here also, mitchila Ephron Omer la Avraham. From the beginning, Ephron said to Avraham, B'lashon matana, using the language of a gift. Mishum delo rotza limkor, because he, Ephron, did not want to sell his land. Delo mesamna le milsa. He had the same concern that we just saw in the Gemara in Kiddushin. He said, this is the first piece of land that I purchased, and it would not be a good omen, it would not be a good sign for me to sell this land. So he said, I'm not going to sell the land, but if Avraham wants it, I will give it to him. That's why, the Zera Shimshon saying, that's wwhy Ephron said, here it is, I'm giving it to you as a gift. I'm not selling it to you, I'm giving it to you. But then Avraham, he heard that Avraham was a person who took literally the concept of Sonei Matanos Yichya, and Avraham said, I don't accept gifts. I'm not accepting the land as a gift. V'hu lo hayarotze b'mecher, and Ephron knew that he didn't want to sell the land, so you have the person who wants to acquire the land doesn't want to take it as a gift. The person who owns the land doesn't want to sell it. Amar lo, so he said to Avram, Eretz arba meo shekel kesef. He kind of said it as a statement of fact, according to the Zera Shimshon. This is a land that is worth 400 shkolim. Remez lo, which was Ephron's way of hinting to Avram, shivoy hakarka, the value of this piece of land, kedei sheyitnum lo Avraham, in order that Avram would know how much to give to Ephron, lo b'toras mekach u'memkar, not as a normal sale, rak only kedei lehinatzel mehahi desoni matanos yichya, only as a stratagem, as a tactic, so Avraham could be spared violating the principle of sonei matanos yichya, of receiving gifts. So Ephron was a very sharp person, according to what the Zera Shimshon is saying. He understood quickly that he knew from himself he wasn't going to sell the land because that would be a siman ra, a bad omen. And he saw quickly that Avram wasn't willing to take a gift, and that Avram was a man of principle who would not violate that principle. So he said, let me let Avram know how much the land is worth. Avram can then give me the land, but not as a normal purchase because I don't want to sell the land. So we're going to have to come up with kind of a hybrid transaction, kind of a novel transaction to make this work from both sides. V'chein asa Avraham, and so Avraham did. Shelo nasan lo hadomim b'shivoy hakarka. Avram did not give Ephron the money which equaled the value of the land, rak kimo matana acheres, just as if it was a separate gift to Ephron, to muras hakarka, in exchange for the land. So Avram also realized that what was needed here was a novel approach, and that Ephron was in fact understanding that. So Avram said, I'm going to give you 400 silver shkalim, not to buy the land, because I understand you don't want to sell the land. You don't have a normal mekach umemkar. On the other hand, I don't want to just take the land as a gift. So here's 400 silver shkalim. I'm giving this to you, separate, independent of the transaction of the land. Once I give this to you, and then you give to me as a tamura, as a swap, you give me the land, then we will have done something that's not exactly a gift and not exactly a normal sale. Umishum hachi, and because of this, lo kasav kan be'es hakniya, that's why the Torah did not write here at the time of this actual transaction, She'Ephron mochar hasadeh la'Avram. The Torah never says the words that Ephron sold the land to Avram. V'chein lo ksiv nami, and that's also why the Torah doesn't take the opportunity to use a pasuk, that pasuk that the Zera Shimshon suggested, based on the pasuk at the end of Shmuel Beis regarding David HaMelech. That's why the Torah doesn't say Vayiken Avram Asadeh, that Avram purchased the land Bekesef Arbameo Shekel for 400 shekel, Kemo Shekosov David, as was written regarding David HaMelech. The Torah doesn't say it because that would be exactly the wrong thing to say. That would be exactly perfectly inaccurate, because both Ephron and Avram were trying to avoid a normal sale and a normal acquisition through purchase. So that pasuk would not be an apt or accurate description of what was happening. So we see that something very unique was happening that only Ephron and Avram were really aware of, and they worked out a transaction to their mutual benefit, which allowed Ephron to not have to sell the land. It allowed Avram to avoid receiving the land as a gift. In the end, Avraham becomes the owner of the land. Ephron has the funds from Avraham, and everybody lives happily ever after.
So he's a little bit of not such a tzaddik, because on the one hand, what he doesn't want to sell because it's a bad omen, but on the other hand, taking the gift, Sony Matanos, he doesn't really care about.
Sony Matanos, yeah, for sure he doesn't care about.
But he definitely doesn't hold to that.
But we can't really blame him, according to the Zera Shimshon's approach, for taking the money, because according to this approach, Avram insisted upon giving the money. So I don't know if we can blame him. Listen, Chazal, and we see it in Rashi, everybody comes down on it.
I would be happier if the Zera Shimshon said it was B'Toras Hefker. Then I would really buy into it.
Guess what?
It's a brilliant derech, but I'd be more happy if the Zera Shimshon said that there was a Hefker Bezdin Hefker over here.
You're not at all far off. You're going to see something very close to that idea coming up in the next paragraph. So Baruch Shekivanta. Here comes the next paragraph. Ulefi shemiyad she'Ephron nosna b'matana la'Avraham silek yodav mimene. Since from the moment Ephron gave the land to Avram as a gift, right? He says, here it is as a gift. Silek yodav mimene. He removed his hands from it, meaning Ephron made it clear that he no longer wanted possession of this land. He was saying to Avram, from my perspective, I've given it to you as a gift. Avram said, I don't accept gifts. But from Ephron's perspective, he had kind of said, that's it. It's out of my hands. And from the fact that Avram did not want to receive the land as a gift, lo zachaba, he didn't acquire it at that moment. Ephron says, here's the land as a gift. I've got nothing. It's not mine anymore. And Avram says, well, it's not mine because I don't receive gifts. V'hayisa nisheres hefker. And so the land was technically ownerless. L'chol b'nei ches. to all of the townspeople. Anyone hypothetically could have come, any one of the townspeople watching what was going on could have said, well, if Ephron doesn't want it and Avram doesn't want it, let's just go take it. Let's go get this ownerless property. Ki ha'hida Rav Gidl, exactly like the Gemara and Kiddushin talked about in the story of Rav Gidl. Mishum hachi, because of this, nikra she'Avraham kana me'es b'nei ches. And that explains why some of the psukim say that Avraham purchased the land or acquired the land from the Bnei Ches. Kishenosan hakesef leEphron, when Avraham gave the money to Ephron. So the Zera Shimshon originally asked 4 questions. It's all pointed to the fact that something strange is going on. Well, here is the really strange thing. The Zera Shimshon says you have a person, Avram Avinu, giving a large amount of money to Ephron, the person who owns the land, but that's not who he's really acquiring it from. He's acquiring the land from the Bnei Ches. How in the world did the Bnei Ches become the owners of this land? Because Ephron says, it's not mine, I gave it to Avram. Avram said, I don't receive gifts. So the Bnei Ches kind of became, maybe you might say it's a communal ownership of the land, and therefore Avram really was, in a way, acquiring the land. Even though he's giving the money to Ephron, he's acquiring the land from the Bnei Ches. Ulefisha lo hayakan lo mecher gamor velo matana gemura, and since there wasn't here a complete sale, and there also was not a complete gift, meaning nothing that happened here followed the normal rules and protocols of a sale transaction, a mekach umemkar, and also this was not a normal matana situation either, mishum hachi, because of this, ksiv, the pasuk wrote, v'kam hasadeh, and the land rose up, v'chule, etc. D'mimela kam birishuso shel Avraham, meaning to say, of its own almost, it went up into Avraham's property, b'nesinas the giving of the money, she'asa le'Ephron, that he did to Ephron. So the Zera Shimshon says, why did the Torah use this strange language about the field rising up and becoming Avram's? Because the Torah could not say Avraham, it didn't want to summarize the transaction as Avraham bought the land from Ephron, or Ephron gave the land to Avraham. That is not exactly what happened. And so therefore the Torah wanted to say this land rose up into Avraham's possession, and we're being vague about how that happened because Avram and Ephron both wanted it to be an unusual, novel, kind of vague, hybrid type of transaction. So the Zera Shimshon, with that last point, has now answered his 4 questions, but we'll recap that at the end. We're going to do one more paragraph before we stop. This particular piece goes on and on. It goes on much longer, but it goes into topics that are beyond our subject matter for tonight. So, last paragraph. V'o yesh lomar, the Zera Shimshon says there's actually more of an explanation. There are more things we can add to understand some of the questions that we asked. There's more to add to the answers. Shelefisha b'nei ches hayu yicholim le'arer mitam bar matra, since the townspeople of b'nei ches had a legitimate claim against Ephron for selling his piece of land to Avram, who was a stranger, and not offering it to them. Of course, that's the Dina de Bar Matra that we talked about in the beginning. They had a valid claim. Nikra, that's why it's called She'Avraham Kana Hasad Me'es B'nei Ches. That's an additional reason why one of the psukim says Avraham bought the land from the Bnei Ches. In other words, not only because of the Hefker issue that we talked about in the previous paragraph, the Zera Shimshon says, in addition to that, even putting that aside, the fact is that they had a legitimate claim of bar matzra, and they could have they could have had legal grounds to prevent the sale going forward from Ephron to Avram of this piece of property, and claiming that they should have the right to buy it instead of Avraham. So therefore, the Torah hinted to that fact by talking about Avraham buying the land from the Bnei Ches, meaning he had to convince them and mollify them and talk to them in order to get their permission to purchase, to acquire the land. Umishum hachi kosav kra hasade asher kana Avraham me'es b'nei ches v'lo kosav Ephron, and that's why the pasuk talked about buying it from b'nei ches and it didn't write that he bought it from Ephron. because he also bought it from them. Of course, it was Ephron's land. The Torah is obviously not denying that it was Ephron's land originally, but the Bnei Ches also were involved in this transaction going through. And since Ephron, in truth, did not say, I'm hands off and I don't own the property anymore, Ella Kadesha Yivske Avram, only in order that Avram should get it. Ephron had no intention of making his land hefker to his fellow townspeople, to the Bnei Ches, right? Ephron had one intention in mind, and that was that this land should end up going to Avram Avinu. So he says, Avram, I'm giving it to you as a gift. And that's what the Zer Shimshon calls Silek Yodav. He took his hands back from the land and he says, it's not mine. I gave it to Avram. The problem was Avram wouldn't receive it. But Ephron only did this action of saying the land is, I no longer own the land, in order for it to go to Avram, not for it to become in any way communal property or public property, or even to be open to any of the other townspeople getting a hold of the land. So because of that, the Od Shekibel HaKesef T'murasa, and also because Ephron did in fact receive a lot of money in exchange for the land, Kosav Kra, the Pasuk wrote Achar Kach later on, B'Parshas Vayechi, at the end of Sefer Bereshis, Shekona me Ephron, that Avram purchased the land from Ephron. So now, this is our stopping point, and there's a whole lot of material here, but let's go back and just quickly recap how the Zer Shimshon answered his question. So the first question was, why did Ephron talk about giving the land to Avram, and then a few psukim later, the Torah tells us about selling the land to Avram? What was going on there? So of course, that's the whole piece that we read. Ephron wanted to give it to Avram. Avram said, I don't accept gifts. So Ephron said, okay, so then we're going to have to talk about a sale, but I don't want to sell my land. And they worked out this novel solution between them. Second question was, what does the phrase Vayokom Sidei Ephron really mean? What does it mean it rose up? So the Zer Shimshon says the Torah was in a bind. It didn't want to exactly refer to this as a normal sale, and it also didn't want to refer to it as a gift. And so it used the vague language of the land came up into Avram's possession. How exactly that happened, the Torah says, well, you have to look at the details of the story, but it came up to be Avram. In the end, in the final analysis, the Torah says the bottom line is this land now has come up and is part of Avram's possessions. How the details of how that was transacted is complicated. Question 3 talks about the fact that some psukim seem to indicate Avram bought the land from the Bnei Ches. Some psukim seem to indicate that he bought it from Ephron. And so the Zer Shimshon discussed how, even though the land belonged to Ephron, obviously from the beginning, at the start of the story, the Bnei Ches were involved, both in terms of the Dina de Bar Matzra, their claim of we're your neighbors, sell it to us first, not to the stranger. And 2, the land for a moment there kind of became ownerless because Ephron gave it to Avram. Avram didn't accept it. And so the Bnei Ches had a certain ownership claim to what seemed to be technically Hefker land, ownerless land. And so in a way, Avram bought the land from the Bnei Ches. And then the final question was, why didn't the Torah use the format of a pasuk that we see at the end of Shmuel Beis, where it clearly states David HaMelech bought this land from its owner for 50 shekels. Just say that over here, and all issues and vagueness will disappear. So the Zer Shimshon says the Torah couldn't do that because it didn't want to state clearly that Avraham bought the land from Ephron, and it didn't want to clearly state Ephron gave the land to Avram. Neither of those would have really accurately described this special transaction that the two of them came up with and worked on together. Yasher koach for everyone joining this week in the Zer Shimshon, and God willing, we look forward to studying the Zer Shimshon together on next week's Parsha.